It will be available through Ben's YouTube channel. There will be links to it provided from our different user group sites. Ben, the meeting is yours. Take off at will.
Thank you very much. Let me attempt to share my screen. See if I'm good at that. Ha! Looks like I might be good at that. All right, so this is day 2. There will be a few slides to introduce the things we got going, but I won't go as long tonight. We'll actually end on time because I'm aware now that my clock is not the same, so it's all good. This is the Advanced PowerShell for the DBA Night 2, and this will take us through modules deep dive, and we're going to have some fun with some modules we have here. And it will set us up again from using stuff we used yesterday to getting to where we get to use it all tomorrow. And there will be a lot of concepts that you can leverage. I won't go too far in detail as far as prescribing a way that you use this stuff, but mostly giving you the ideas that can help you move forward in your own way.
Ben?
So, yep.
Just to interrupt for a moment, feel free to cut off when you feel the need to cut off. Yeah. But do not cut off because of a time limit. Yeah. I will make sure you get all the time you want.
Yeah, no worries. So this is me. The most important is the email address. You can email me at ben@benmiller.net to ask questions, to follow up, to make sure that I don't forget to put the stuff up on the GitHub. But there's my Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I am DBAduck everywhere, as you can see from this slide. This is the agenda for the slides. There won't be a whole lot of slides. We'll do more demo. And as you found out if you were here yesterday, I like to do demos in a little more ad hoc way than to do canned scripts that I'm just highlighting and executing. Mostly because in the advanced part of this, you need to see when you fat finger something, when you type something and it goes wrong, when you forget a parameter. All those things are important, so we'll get there. So the first thing we're going to talk about is SMO, because this is going to be the underlying feature to manage databases. Now, you won't see SMO a lot formally, but I promise you it's all the way under the covers, and you will want to know what that means. We're going to talk about the module information that you're going to want to know, because tomorrow we're going to actually dive deep into using these commands. And when you see the command, it'll be a little more scripted tomorrow, just because I won't have enough time to code things on the fly. But we will take you through everything you need to know to get going, and then you'll get the scripts afterwards as well. So we'll talk about the module information you need to know, and then we'll basically cover the modules that we're going to be talking about today and using tomorrow. So first, SMO. It is a topic that has in the past been very attributed to development. Most DBAs like, I'm not a developer. I don't know what object-oriented programming means. I really don't care. I just want to manage my database. And that's where modules are great. But there are some things you really need to know about SMO in order to get the most out of it. So a beginning topic might show you a couple of things about SMO and then never talk about it again. Management Studio uses SMO everywhere. I mean, it is the underlying thing, and you can think of it as an API. Microsoft built one for themselves, and that's what Management Studio used predominantly in the olden days. And I say olden days, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to have been around the bush for a while. But SMO is going to be very important. Now, the two ways you can get SMO, or that you access SMO, are: one, I say yesterday because that really is a thing of the past. It is a real thing if you're on an older machine and you just need a quick SMO thing and you don't have the modules installed. It is a real thing for older servers and older management studios. It used to be that Management Studio in the version 16 and below used to install the GAC version of SMO. I'll show you where it is. It's in C Windows Assembly, but I'll show you what it looks like and why you care. But for some reason, I just lost my, oh, yeah, that's why. I was like, I just lost my slide. The C Windows assembly is where all the GAC or the global assembly cache. Now, remember, PowerShell is written on .NET, so it uses .NET assemblies. And so the SMO yesterday used to be in the GAC. It was in GAC MSIL, so it wasn't in the x86 or x64, so it was platform independent, so it could run under either x86 or x64, just like with the same DLL, so it didn't matter. The only difference is where it put it in the SDK and stuff like that, so that mattered which one you installed. Because the 64-bit one wouldn't install on a 32-bit operating system. So they did separate out the installs, mostly for the installer, not for the objects. Today, we're really in a new world in the embedded side because it used to be that SMO wasn't declared as distributable. So anybody who's coded and written programs, they would write it and reference a DLL, and that DLL would come with the executable when you built your installer and brought it with you. So when you installed it, it would lay down the DLLs that your application required. Now, SMO was not listed in the redist type things back in the day. Today, they've actually created a NuGet package with all your SMO, and I'll show you that today to show you how you get it if you just can't find it. And we'll talk about the ways you get it, but they've stopped producing the SMO stuff and the PowerShell stuff in a feature pack. So those of you who've been around for a while know that they used to produce a feature pack for every version of SQL and every service pack of SQL. It had a feature pack that you could download, and they had 3 modules that you would download. One was the CLR data types, one was the SMO, and the other was the PowerShell module called SQL PS. And those are gone. They don't produce feature pack. They produce feature packs, but not including SMO and the PowerShell stuff that they're kind of missing, and on purpose. The embedded and side-loaded DLLs for SMO are now available, and DBA Tools and SQL Server distributes them with it when it's loaded. So I'll show you that, and that will be your only foray into the guts of where they are, how they are, and whether you care. And then we'll show you how to tell which one's loaded. So that's SMO in a big nutshell. Module information, things you're going to need to know today mostly are around DBA Tools and SQL Server. The other modules really are their own baby, and their commands are not conflicting with these two. DBA Tools and SQL Server do have commands that do the same thing, maybe in a different way, maybe with more parameters, maybe with less, but the agreement between Chrissy Lemaire and the SQL Server team, Matteo, and those who developed this module were that in the case that you are going to have a duplicate, and I'll give you an example, get login. SQL Server module has a get-SQL login, and DBA Tools has a get-DBA login. If they were to have done get-login and SQL Server did get-login, they would conflict. And remember how I said that you had to do an allow clobber? The allow clobber was because they had the same commands. In this case, the SQL Server module wasn't conflicting with DBA Tools, but it was conflicting with its own SQL PS sister that has been deprecated. So Chrissy agreed that their prefix would be DBA because it's DBA Tools. And SQL Server agreed that they would make their prefix SQL because they're the SQL Server module or SQL Server team. So in all commands in the DBA Tools before 1.0, they had a mix because they had already released these pre-release commands with get-SQL, and they were known by people who used it. When they went 1.0, they took them out of the module and only exclusively used DBA as the 3-letter prefix of any command in the noun part of things. So get-DBA database, get-DBA login and such. And same with SQL Server, get-SQL login, get-SQL instance. So those are the way you're going to know which commands are which. And we'll go through a lot of commands today, so you'll get a really good flavor of that. The other thing to know that is different between DBA tools and SQL Server is that DBA tools in their SQL instance parameter allows multiple instances to be specified. And in many cases, in their database parameter, they also allow multiple databases to be specified. So you can actually do a lot of work in one command. And we're going to show you that in demo to help you get a flavor for how this works. DBA tools does prefer to be loaded first. And if you have SQL Server module loaded first, DBA tools will throw a warning and reprimand you. It will still load, but it throws a warning that gives you the inclination that some things may not work. Now, I have not ran into that myself, but in some cases, it may not work. And you would then go, hey, that may be why. But I'll show you why they like it to be loaded first. And it has everything to do with what they distribute with DBA tools and why this becomes important. So that's the thing. The other part of SQL Server, other than the prefix, is the provider context, which I alluded to yesterday. We did get PS drive, and we showed the registry drive of HKLM, HKCU, and then we showed the other drives, ENV, and all sorts of other things. Now, we're going to show you a new drive that SQL Server module presents to you and give you an opportunity to see what that can do for you. So this is going to be a big deal into diving deep into how you use these things. It won't really go into a lot of examples of how we're going to use it, because tomorrow we're going to actually use these things to do the work. So we're not going to do a lot of doing today. We're going to show you some examples, and we're going to do some things, but not like I'm going to go deep tomorrow. So we'll see the commands work. We will not mix them like we will tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to mix them with your own code, with each other's, with SQL Server and DBA tools together. We're going to do lots of fun things tomorrow to show you where you came from yesterday, to learn about profiles and all the things, where we came to today, to understand what SMO is, how it works, why we care. And then tomorrow we're just going to be all over the board, just having a blast for all sorts of things. So that'll be fun. The modules we're going to cover today, we're going to cover all of these. We won't be doing a whole lot with some, because we just don't have 5 hours to dive in deep. We could take a whole day on these modules alone and dive deep in them. But I'm going to give you a pretty good flavor where you're going to want to dive deep yourself. They're pretty cool. And that is it. So my website is there, my email is there, and slides are done. So most people don't have any heartburn over that. I definitely don't have any heartburn of getting rid of slides, because it ends up making me talk a lot, and I really want to show a lot. So first off, we're going to go into our my folder here, and we're going to just show you the GAC first. So let's open up the GAC. C Windows Assembly. And we're going to show you what that is. So there's a GAC 32, a GAC 64, and a GAC MSIL. Now, you don't have to worry about any of these others, and you really don't have to worry about the GAC MSIL unless there's other things in here that you want that are naturally installed by default. When you install an app that wants to use it across the board, it will install its own things in here. So Build installs a lot of things in here. Office will put their interop in here. So we're going to go down to the Microsoft SQL Server. And as you can see, we have a decent amount of them. And mostly because I've installed SMO before on this machine, they're going to be in here. So let's go to the main SMO one. So Microsoft.SQL Server.SMO. It says it was last modified 1/16 of 21. So let's see what is in here. So what is in here you'll see is 11.0, 12, 13, and 14. Now we're missing 15 because 15 doesn't get installed by default with Management Studio or any other tool because it doesn't need to be. 14 was installed by something else, and there's your DLL, okay? If I do 13, there's your DLL. The thing to remember is look at the suffix of each file or each folder and file. I mean, the file doesn't have it on here, but it is embedded in the file. But this guy is the public key token. So we won't go into how to load them because that's a beginner topic. But I wanted to show you that they're all the same. And if I were to install SMO 15, I could use funky commands in .NET like load, or I could do a load with partial name, which has been deprecated and shouldn't be used, but it will load the latest one on my box. So if I was intending to get 15, I couldn't get 15 because it's not in the GAC. So I would only get 14. And if I'm going 14 to a 15 server, you just roll the dice. Just go to Vegas and have your fun. So that's the GAC. The GAC means that it's globally available to all commands that understand to look in the GAC for the assembly. They're called assemblies. We used to call them DLLs back in the day, or else we couldn't have used the term DLL hell. We couldn't do that if we didn't call them DLLs. But they are DLLs, but we call them assemblies now because they're .NET assemblies. So we know them in SQL Server as assemblies as well. So that's the piece of the GAC. Now, let's talk about a little bit about how the modules sideload now, okay? Because sideload is going to be important for us to understand. So let's go back into our modules folder. Remember that? Program files, Windows, PowerShell, modules. We'll go down to DBA tools. And DBA tools here, we're going to the latest one. And notice there is a ENUS folder. This contains your help. So anytime you see ENUS in a PowerShell, it contains help stuff. So you can do about DBA tools and about DBA tools import options and they'll pull up in help. So that's what the ENUS folder is in every module that you download. If they have help available, not just in the functions, because I'll open up the functions and show you how they document in the function, but any additional about things or DBA tools or anything like that will be in the ENUS folder or the ENCH folder or whatever languages they provide you with in your language stuff. In your bin folder, you will start to see some interesting things. There's .NET 4.5.2. There's .NET Core App 2.1. Here's your libraries. So if we go into the libraries, there's third party. So they can actually bring in third parties. So bin is a really big place. And look at this SMO folder. If I look in here, look what's in here. Lots of DLLs. And look at this. SQL Server, SMO. And this SMO, if I right click and do properties, there's a details tab that lets you see the details. And notice the version. 15.0 point something. It's not a normal thing. If I were to look at the details of the GAC, which I should have probably kept up, but I will go into another window and show you that instead. Let's do the GAC here. See Windows Assembly. We're going to do the same thing on the GAC MSIL part of SMO and show you what that does. Oops, SQL Server.SMO. Go into 14. If I right click on here, properties, and do details, you'll see a different version there. Okay, 14 dot something. So that's just the version of the DLL. Now, what we're going to show you in a minute is what it actually loads. So they have all of the REPL, replication, REPL enum, red server, all the RMO. They have all those in here for your doing when they load the module. Now I'll show you how that works because this is an advanced deal, so you're going to get to see some gory details. But all of these things are in their binary folder, so they can load them when they do the load of the module. Okay, so we're going to go into here, and here's our two files that matter. The PSD one is a module manifest, and this is what governs what gets loaded and how. You can have a module without it, but the module manifest is how you tell what it is. So the root module is PSM1. We'll show you that in a second. The module version, it declares the version of 1.1 through 1.0.137, and notice that is the folder that we are in. So 137 is the folder that gets added to this DBA tools thing. So that's what governs the module version. Its own GUID, so they created a GUID for that. So that's how they're identified inside PowerShell Gallery, the DBA tools team, because there is not one author. And it goes through and says, here's what's going to load. So the version, PowerShell version that's required, if you ever want to know what a module can load under, this is the minimum version of Windows PowerShell that it can run on. So when you start to install and you say you have only 2 and 3 is not on there, it won't let you install it. It'll just tell you I can't. It won't run. It won't do anything because the minimum has not been done. If you're on 4, it will load this module and let you use it because you're above 3. So here's where the fun part comes in. And we're going to talk about a lot more detail about this because SMO in PowerShell lets you do some pretty cool things, but it might freak you out a little bit. But that's what you're here for. So we're going to talk about this XML folder inside the DBA tools in just a moment. But it allows you to type. It lets you tell PowerShell what types of files you're going to load. And then it tells you, lets you tell PowerShell how to format these guys when it sees these objects. So that's what those are, but detail coming. Here's the functions to export. So this is defining what functions this module is allowed to export. There are plenty of functions, as you can see as I scroll and scroll and scroll and see they pound sign out the ones they don't want or the description of them. We get down to the bottom, and then there's commandlets to export. Commandlets to export are from DLLs, and it declares them as commandlets instead of functions. Here's our aliases, and here's where we start loading things. And I'm not sure that they do it in here. This is private data, so it's really not anything. And then here's a signature block that allows you to run this module under all signed instead of remote signed. So that's kind of nice. But it doesn't really say much about anything loading DLLs, okay? But it does say what functions it's going to export. So the PSD one is our module manifest. And here's where we're going to see this guy, PSM1, you're going to see what's in there to see how it governs what it loads as well. So these two make the team. Let's just open with Notepad. I'm not going to open with the Notepad++ because it'll go off my screen. So this is a normal function. This is like a module or a PS1 file. It just PSM1 means it's a module guy, and it can have logic in there, start, date, time, and then says if and all these things. So here's where you'll see the type of help that's embedded in the function. So they open with comments, and then they do synopsis, description, parameter, example. But this is for loading, so they create their own functions to load things. Now, here's where they start loading the assemblies down here. I won't, if I can't find it really fast, I will not belabor this idea. Still has your commands. And I know they loop through them, so I shouldn't really try to find them in here. But basically, they go into the bin folder. I guess I could just go up to the top here and just do bin. PS module root bin, and then filter by star DLL, and it unblocks them first in case they're blocked, in case you pulled down a zip file and you didn't unblock it before you unzipped. That would be a problem. And then it finishes with that, and then your DLL root for your script, it's defining a script variable to say, give me the DLL, and then it loads them. So write import time, starting to import SMO libraries. And then it starts loading them. So it loads all of the ones that are star.dll. And then it goes and gets the script functions and loads them as well. So lots of stuff happening in this guy, just tons of stuff. But when it gets done loading, it has loaded all of the DLLs for the bin folder. So anything in bin and anything for DLL, it loads first. And then it gets all of the stuff in SMO, loads that, and does all sorts of stuff after that. So that's where we get our SMO. So no more GAC. No more GAC at all. Okay. So let's go and look at one more thing. The XML folder, beautiful folder. I'll tell you, this is how you can do some really funky things, and things you would never know as a beginner. You really don't know why they work, but this is how they work. And this is how you can do some things too. So the format, I'm going to go into types first and then the format. This types file is not very big, but basically what it allows you to do is mess with the objects, because PowerShell is a dynamic language and it allows you to mess with the object, which is kind of cool. It doesn't persist it in the DLL, but it lets you mess with it, which is super darn cool. And I'll show you how it works. But there is a type right here that says type. And if any of you know XML, you know there's a begin tag and an end tag right here, end type. So this type says the name of it is Microsoft SQL Server Management SMO Database. So whenever you see a database object that's telling PowerShell, do this, it's going to add a member to it. And the member is named query. And it's a script method. So it's running a script. Here's your script. Param query. So that's a query parameter. All tables equals false. So it's defaulting all tables to false. You can set all tables to true with a parameter. And then it proceeds to do this script using the SMO database object. There's an execute with results. You can do the query if the all tables is true. And then it sends back all the tables coming from the query. So if your query returns two select statements, you'll get two tables back. Else, if it's not all tables, then it will just execute and give you the first table back, and you get one table worth of data, and that's it. So it has dynamically, with this PS types, it has dynamically added a script method to your code. Then there's another script method, okay? There's the end of the script method, and it adds one more to this database guy called invoke. And the script basically says command. So that would be an update statement, an insert statement, something that doesn't return anything because it runs execute non-query. So this all seems ominous, but you'll see where it matters in a minute. Then it adds one more. So it has one for the database and has one for the server. And the server also has a query method on the server, and it does a little bit more. Okay, it can do an execute scaler, it can do all sorts of things, but it does some things more because you're executing it from the server perspective, and that means that the query could execute under any context, and you need to know what context it's executing. So you get the option to specify a database to execute it under, where the database object is already in a database, so there is no context to specify. So it just runs the query in the database, and you're good to go. The server kind of has to mess with the context and say, which database do I execute under? Which one do I do? And it determines it. But same thing at the end. If all tables, give me all the tables. If not, just give me the first table because I didn't say all tables, so it's just going to give me one. And end script method. And then it adds one more called invoke to the server, just like the database, and gives a command and a database and lets you run it from the server. So super, super, super cool. It adds a couple more, but these are more DBA tool stuff, not SMO stuff. DBA tools exception that allows it to have PS standard members, and the depth of the serialization is 2. So this is all for it. And then after it does its 2 for the DBA tools exceptions, it actually, there's your signature to sign the script with the code signing. So this types file looks a little weird because it's XML, but I'll show you what it does to the object and you'll be like happy because now you have access to some things you wouldn't have had access to without writing code to do it. So let's go into the format types just to give you a flavor of what that does. Basically, you can specify a type, and you can say whenever you see this type, so here's the server, I want you to do a table header. They don't do any table headers, and they specify they want to see the computer name, the product, the version, host platform. I'll show you how this works because there's lots more properties than these in the server object. And then they do something also with the collaborative tools DBA disk space, and I'll show you that. And I'll show you how to see what's under the cover. So this is by no means modifying the object. It's telling PowerShell when you see this type of object, what to display, what columns, whether I align right, all these things that just show me this, and that's it, even though there's more properties. And so it will do these for you. And there's quite a few types that it puts in there. If you want to dive deep into this, you can go deeper, but I don't want to take up all the time just going into this stuff because this is not why we're here, is to learn how to program. We're talking about DBA work. But it's super cool what you can do and why it works. But that's the two files that DBA Tools adds into their mix and loads them when you load the module so that you get some superpowers. All right. So I will show you very quickly those methods so we can move on. We did show all of these things, the module folder and the PS format types. And now we're going to teach you a couple things about the module. So get command. I have reloaded my PowerShell window so that we don't have any residuals from last time. If you ever do a get command with a dash module, it does load the module. So it does import the module and then gives you the commands. So if I were to run this, we would see that there's a lot of gobbledygook down here that comes up and says, here's all the commands. It took a minute for 4.7 seconds because it loaded the module, then it got the commands. But what I want to show you really fast, we'll go back and do it again. But if I say server equals connect dash DBA instance with SQL instance as bendesk, you'll see it connected, but I'll show you there's a get member or GM. Like I said, I'm typing on the command line, so I might not do get dash member, but I'll show you this is where you see the added thing. Notice this little invoke script method. Hey, that's pretty cool. That's kind of cool because it added this and query as well. Okay, so that's kind of cool. If I were to do database, so server.databases, the first database, just because I'm just going to get member anyway, you'll see I have invoke and query here as well on my objects. So that's how they represent themselves as script methods. You'll see properties, you'll see methods, and you'll see an event. But if you've messed with it with PS format types, you will actually get extra stuff. Or PS types, you'll get extra stuff down here at the bottom with script methods. So pretty cool. Just to give you an example, server.query, and I'm going to just do select add at server name, and out comes my column 1 because I didn't alias it. If I would have said as server, I would have seen server and then bendesk. Okay, so I mean right there, bam, I can just execute a query. I don't have to go fire up another command or whatever. We're going to see the other commands in a minute, but this is super awesome. A query means you're going to get results back. Invoke means just do something. So if I was going to invoke an alter database command, I just do an invoke, not a query. Even though query would work, there's really no table to return. So you don't have to mess with that, right? So that's kind of the point. Let's see. I do not think so. There's a question in the chat that whether they use PS Drive anywhere within the DBA tools functions. I do not believe so, because that would mean that they would have to set them up first. And I don't believe there's any reason to use the PS drives other than the built-in ones. They might use the registry, they might use environment, but they don't create new drives that I know of and use them. They actually just leverage the built-in ones. which are, as we saw before, we see alias, cert, env, function, hkculm, and variable and wsman. So though they might use the built-in ones, but I don't know that they create their own or do anything like that. So commands are cool. I'm going to show you some of my setup that I talked about yesterday. We showed a little bit about ideas about how you can set things up. I gave a couple of examples of using commands, or variables called vars, but we'll show a little more practical use of these. In this particular environment, I have BenDesk, which is this machine. I have two instances, one called instance 1 and one called instance 2. So I basically created a variable called instance 1, a variable called instance 2. I created a variable called all servers and put them in an array. So I have BenDesk instance 1, instance 2 as my all servers because I'm allowed to do things like this. Get database, SQL instance, all servers. Even though there's 3 of them, DBA Tools knows to run these guys, and I'll do just a second. I didn't run all of these, my bad. So now I did get server, and look at all that happens. I get this big long list of things, but look at what it looks like. This is what they did in PS format types. Look at that. They said, here's what I want you to show, and it showed it. Now this isn't all the properties, but these are some properties. We'll get to see all of them in a minute when we start talking toward the end, when we start talking about import Excel. But that's what it did. It just dumped all of these things, and you'll notice here's my instance name, MS SQL Server. But as we go down to the bottom, we'll see the instance name is BenDesk instance 2. So it did grab all of them. Instance 2, here's my instance 1, and that's pretty cool. Now, this function also lets me do exclude, right? So I can do exclude system. And then if I ran this, I would only see those that were non-system. So I would only see 1 in instance 1 and 2, and I'd see 1 in instance 1, 1 in instance 1, 1 in instance 1, and then I start looking at the instance of BenDesk. So it did exclude my system ones if I wanted it to. I could still, if I wanted to, pipe this to a select, right? I could say pipe to select, and I say instance name, and let's do database name. Oh, don't. Sometimes IntelliSense can work against you, but that's just life. So now you look and see, I didn't do instance name, my bad, instance name. But notice what it did. Nothing came back because PowerShell is a dynamic language and it doesn't really care. So here's my instance name. Now I see I got these guys in my instance name, and I see that I have instance 1 and instance 2 and all as well. So I can do a select even after that and pipe that in there. So it got all of them from all the servers, and it did this. Now I could say here also, I could say -database, and it would let me do, if you look at the DBA instance parameters, it's an array, and the database is a string array. So I could actually say, show me all the instances that have a demo TDE database. And it would show that instance 1 has one and instance 2 has one. So all of a sudden I can whittle down these guys with these all servers. I could have a database list in an array as well, like this. So this kind of configuration can be really, really handy. We'll show you a more advanced one here in a minute. But I wanted to show you the things we talked about yesterday, where you can set up variables to be the name of your instance and just use that. You know it as BenDesk. So just use the variable called BenDesk, and you know what's in it. It's a variable that has your BenDesk name in it. So you don't have to worry about that. And then combining them. Now we're going to talk about credentials here in a minute that lets you do more with that and have actually a credential. But one of the things that this doesn't show you yet is this type of guy. So see this vars 3, and it's a hash table. So instead of a @ parenthesis, which is an array, I'm creating a hash table that has a name, like we talked about yesterday, and a value. So it's a name and value pair. But notice what these look like. They kind of look like the same name as the parameters I used. Huh. Well, that's interesting. So let's go and do that command. So vars 3, we're going to say get -DBA database. And we're going to do an symbol. Oh, it's right there. I didn't even have to type it. I did set me up for success. vars3 with an @ symbol. This is called splatting. So now I get the SQL help database, because that's the database I specified, and I get the instance of Bendesk, and that's all it brought back. If you look at the results here, that's all it brought back. So it took from my variable, or my hash table, it took the SQL instance name and associated the value with my parameter called SQL instance. It took the database and associated the parameter of database with SQL help, and that's the database I got back. So you can knock yourself out here with lots and lots of things. Now, the other thing I want to show you is that if you run a command that has multiples, so we're going to use vars here because it only has a SQL instance. So we're going to use vars1 here, get-dba database, vars1, but our vars, and vars doesn't have a database, but I want to specify a database, but I wanted to use this as generic because I want to pass it in everything, and not all of them have database. So let's do -database, and we're going to say SQL help. And it still let me do it. It got SQL help, and it got my local instance. So I can combine the two, parameters plus vars. I can even pass in multiple vars. I can actually do vars and vars3. So if I do, I don't know that it'll work on this one. I've never tried it with parameters that have the same name. I think it'll actually bark at me, but we're going to try it anyway because I like to do demos where I have no idea what's going to happen. And it comes in and says it's specified more than once. So it doesn't like you. So just know you can't do that. But if I had one, we'll just fake it and we'll say server S equals Bendesk and D equals SQL help. Actually, we're going to do this. We're going to do @ and we're going to do SQL instance equals. We'll go here and we'll do the same with this guy and say we're going to use database equals SQL help. Now these can be in quotes as well, and PowerShell is case insensitive, so I don't have to worry about the case. So S and D, there we go. We have those variables now, and now I'm going to say S and D. Okay, and there we go. I got my SQL help and my Bendesk, and I got to pass them twice. So if I mix and match any of these variables up here in my config, I can mix and match all I want. I can have sets of database names. I can have sets of servers, server set 1, server set 2, and you can operate on them by just splatting them into your parameter or your commands. So super powerful. You'll see where this is going to become super valuable when we start mixing things tomorrow. But the idea is that you can mix multiple splats, but then I could also say exclude system. And if I did exclude user, watch what happens there. I already am, I'm trying to get a user database, and there's nothing that comes back because I said, get me these guys and get me the database called SQL help, but it is a user database, and I said exclude user, so it just didn't give me anything back. So you can, knock yourself out into oblivion, but I wanted to show you this principle because tomorrow we're going to use a little bit of it to show you how you can fully configure your environment with all sorts of different ways. And notice here, my vars2, I created a SQL instance that had multiples in the instance name. So I only have to pass in vars2, not multiple of them. So I can actually get my databases from multiple instances because it takes multiple parameters or multiple. You can pass in multiple servers for the SQL instance parameter. So you get the ability to put an array in as your value instead of just a string or an int, or you get to mix and match all types of things. And that's where we come with credentials, and that's what we'll show you in a minute. So this does recognize a SQL credential as well. So that could be just as well be part of my SQL instance here, I could actually add SQL instance and then semicolon and then do SQL credential and put in a credential object, and it would load it and it passed that right in. So pretty cool, powerful on the splatting. So that's a really fun thing. So let's talk about this little command here, get DBA reg server. It's going to be your favorite. We're going to set up some things tomorrow to use this. The caveat here is that on my local box here, I have some registered servers, but I am on my local box, and these point all to my local box. So by default, DBA Tools filters local servers so that it only looks at remote servers. So I had to include local because in demo, I don't have a remote server for this particular demo. And so I have to include local to get my servers. But notice what I get. I get my instances in my local server groups. But Azure Data Studio, I have 3 instances specified, and you'll see them right here. If I click on servers, they're right here. And they registered themselves inside the registered servers list, and DBA Tools can extract them. So that command will become your friend. If you don't use registered servers, you might think about that. It also lets you get a SQL instance can point to a central management server, which again, I don't have on here. It's blank, it's empty. But if I had a central management server, I could actually point to it, and it will pull the groups and the instances from there as well. So that's super, super cool. Okay, any questions so far? Anyone? Nobody? Bueller? Nope, guess not. All right.
Good stuff.
And sorry if nobody understood the Bueller reference, but I'm old. It's all good. All right, so let's talk about another command. Now, we're going to go a little bit beyond this guy. Restore-DBA database is a staple, just as backup-SQL or DBA database is as well. But there's a few things that people don't really know about what it can do. So by default, if I back up a SQL database, I have a folder in my bin folder called SQL Backup. And my SQL backups are here. I have demo TDE and I have my differential. I put them in 2 different files, so I split my backups. And it's nice, it's handy to have the databases here. But what if I wanted to restore demo TDE and actually restore the diffs as well? How do I do that without knowing where they're at? So I could come down here and say get-DBA DB backup history with a SQL instance of, I believe, we're going to do Bendesk with the database. Nope, it's actually Bendesk instance 1 with a database of, I don't get IntelliSense, how rude. Maybe I typed the command wrong. Well, that's okay. I probably didn't load. No, I did load it because DBA reg server worked. So I'm going to do demo TDE. And there's my backups. Now, the backups, I backed them up here and the type is full. So I have one that was done on 2018 and I did it twice. So 2136, 2147, and then I backed up this guy on 1631, 4:30 today, my time. Not sure how that's possible. Oh no, maybe I did it while we were in the pre-meeting. So there's my backup history. So I can do that. And I can then actually say pipe to restore-DBA database and start doing my parameters. Now, what this will do is it will let me get the backup history. It will let me restore the DBA database. And that's nice. That's a really handy thing. And it's very common to do that. So you can restore from one to the other. I will tell you, one of the caveats is that the file names come from the SQL Server MSDB backup media family table, which contains the actual physical name that it was backed up to. So if you're backing up to a local drive and you want to restore that backup, and you're not on that machine, it will try to restore, and you're not going to restore to that machine. You're going to restore to a second machine. You'll need to mess with the paths. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to show you more how to do that, because we're going to show you a refresh my dev database server from my main database server. And we're just going to refresh the databases from one to the other. And in order to do that, when it's a different machine, and we'll have different machines tomorrow, we won't have my local guy, because my local guy will understand D:\\. The remote guy won't. It will not understand it at all, and will need a UNC path because it won't be local to that instance. You guys get and understand database restores and backups. But here's something you may not know that you can do with this guy. And that is, what if I did a dir or a get child item, dir of cbin SQL backup, and I said filter star.diff or star.back, and I said I want to type file. Okay. So let's run that. We get demo TDE. These are the fulls, and these are the diffs. So that's nice. I get my full and I get my diff. But what do I do with those? Did you know that you can actually then say restore-DBA database and point to the instance of Bendesk one, and I'm going to say with replace, we're just going to write over them, and it will actually restore those files. It will take all the files in play, and this command will actually put them in order. So I've done this with full, diff, and logs, and lots of logs. And they're not necessarily, if they were named helter skelter, it would figure out based on the restore backup header and the restore file list only. The backup header is what that uses, but it'll restore the backup header and order them in list of LSN order. And it will then start restoring in that order. I didn't have to tell it what order. I just told it what files I wanted to execute, and it starts to do its thing. It says, oh, let me go ahead and find out what the headers are, and I'm restoring, and look at that. It restored. It restored my database with those things. Remote diff. What? That is super, super cool. Now, the output is a little not helpful in this case because it didn't output everything it restored, because it says the last thing to restore was the diff backup, which it did, but it doesn't say anything about my full. But I know it had to restore the full, because if I go into instance one and restore or refresh, it's there, but it's all restored. So that's kind of weird, but it did do both. The output just doesn't illustrate that it did. So be aware that sometimes you don't get everything you expect. In this case, it only told you the last one, but it tells you the parameters. The database name says how big the backup was, told you who owned it, and then restore time took 1 second because it was teeny small. It did a no recovery, nope, false. It restores complete. It would say if it didn't complete, it would give you an error and say false. Tells me how many restore files I did, and then with replace was true. So it tells me all of the things I told it, and all of a sudden things are happy. So nice command, even doing files rather than doing get-dba backup history. So you can do it lots of ways, but super fun to use an advanced technique that really isn't known very well in most circles. So restore-DBA database is pretty cool. So now we're going to go through some of the commands of the module DBA tools before we switch over and do the SQL Server module. So let's expand this guy. We're going to get dash command module of DBA tools. And this is another way you can be a little interrogative. Verb get. So I only want to see all the commands in DBA tools with the get command, which are lots. But things like get DBA trace flag. Ooh, I wonder if there's a sister to that guy that says set DBA trace flag. Let's check this out. Set. Set DBA, nope, no DBA trace flag. So no sister. But this is how you have a little fun in knowing what you can do. Get DBA privilege, get DBA power plan. Doesn't sound much like a DBA function, but the power plan is important to your SQL Server. If you're running in balanced power mode, that's terrible. It can, shut down if it wants to, and you don't ever want that to take place. Or pause or like sleep or whatever. But there's some PBM commands, so policy-based management. There's all sorts of get DBA operating system. That's kind of handy. Page file setting. That's kind of handy. Some of these aren't database, but they're for DBAs. Get DBA login, which I alluded to. So all of a sudden, this is really important to know. Now, why I show you this, there's sets, there's new keyword, there are new verbs, there's invoke verbs, there's test. We'll show you that in a second. But lots of things. Get DBA instance triggers. Are there instance triggers? Are there database triggers? Maybe there might be database triggers. You want to know that. So you could get a good lay of the land quickly with some of these commands and not even break a sweat instead of right clicking or trying to drill down into Object Explorer. And some of these things aren't even in Object Explorer. You have to find them out by doing queries to the DMVs. Where these guys, you just get DBA foreign key for database. File groups and files. Now here's the caveat. Notice what the name is. What would you expect to come back from that command? To me, I'm an SMO junkie, so I want an SMO object, and we'll show you why. This command actually doesn't return a SMO object. It actually returns information. So I'll show you how you tell. So we're going to go down in here and we're going to say, before we go there, remember in my profile, we had a get-myos assemblies. We did this guy and we said, hey, we have this function up here called get my OS assemblies because I want to know what's loaded. Let's go there first. Then we'll go to the next place. All right. Let me just make a note. Okay. Get my OS assemblies, because here's why DBA tools wants you to load it first. So notice the version. 15.100. 15.100. But what was the version in the GAC? Remember? Anybody remember? 14.0.0.0. Microsoft decided that for all of the distributable SMO, they were going to version it as 100. So that you knew that when you saw that version number, that you knew it was side-loaded, not pulled from the GAC. And that can matter. It may not matter. This may be something that's pulled from the other ones. Now notice these are 15.0.0 and these are 14.0.0.0. So you want to know that these are ones that are side-loaded and more compatible with the new versions of SQL and has the new commands and stuff. So that could be a big deal. Now we're going to dovetail in there with get my OS assemblies. We're going to dovetail in here for just a quick second. And this is the PowerShell gallery. And actually, I don't even think it is PowerShell gallery. I think you will get it. I'm just going to type in SMO, but I don't think it's actually here. I believe it's on, yep, it is on the NuGet. NuGet package SMO. NuGet gallery SQL management objects. Ironically, the the name that they used to use was shared management objects, and now they're calling it SQL, which doesn't matter. Just know that they're the same. If you see SQL management objects, know that it's the same when somebody says shared management objects. They're the same thing. But notice I have a 161.46041, which could be newer than the one DBA Tools loads because of whatever reason. But if I were to go down here and I said I wanted to download this package, this is a little trickier than a module package. But because we're in an advanced session, you're going to see a little down and dirty because you can once it gets done scanning for viruses. All right, here we go. We're going to properties and unblock. We're going to rename this guy from a new package to a zip. And if you wanted to do this .zip, that's totally fine too, to make sure you knew it was a NuGet package. If I open this up, notice it's a little different because it's not a module. It's actually stuff. So here's your new spec. Here's your content types. Here's your package. Service. Is it your package? No. So they have obfuscated it under lib. So everything in your NuGet packages that are DLLs or packages full of things, they're in the library or lib folder. So in the lib, you see which ones. You want ones that work with .NET Core App 3.1. So that's the .NET Core 3.1 framework. And notice there is an SMO that works in the 3.1 framework. So you can export that one. If I did properties, it won't really show me here until I export it. But these are the ones for Core 3.1, or these are the Core Standard, and these are the ones that work in Core Standard if that's what you have. Both of these are .NET Core, so they actually will work on Linux. And here's your .NET 461 and your 462. Backwards, but 461, 462. So you can actually export all of these into a folder and load them yourself because they're redistributable. So that's what NuGet package gets you in the SMO realm. You don't have to put them in the GAC. You can have them in a folder and just load them from there. And you can set up your workstation or your jump box however you want. It's totally a doable deal. So you shouldn't be worried about anything. But in the distributed ones that aren't part of the SMO GAC, you'll see 100. So don't be alarmed. Now, this version could be version 15.100, and it could be a different version than the one that SQL Server loads. But here's the rule. If you've been to my classes before, you'll hear this rule again. But the rule is in PowerShell, whichever one gets loaded first is the winner. So if I loaded this with DBA Tools, and then I loaded SQL Server module, it would want to load the same version, 15.100.0.0. It wouldn't load it, number one, because the version number is the same. So it would omit loading it. And what if I was loading an older version of SQL Server module and it had 14.100.0.0? It would load it. But guess what happens? Whenever you do a new object, the new object will actually use the first one. So if you load SQL PS and you get a 12.0.0.0, and then you load DBA Tools, yes, the DBA Tools will load the 15.100.0.0, but when it does a new object inside it, it will actually pick up the 12.0.0.0. Be very careful in how you manage it. And that's why I wrote the Get My OS assemblies, because I wanted to know before I load some things, do I have them in there? Now, this only is relevant to you if you have a workstation where you've been working for a while and you've had this PowerShell window up for a while, and then you go decide to load something, you might have SMO already loaded. In most automations, you're going to load it from the get-go, right? The PowerShell.exe is going to load. It's going to have no modules in it, no SMO in it, and you're going to load the module. You're guaranteed to get the version you expect. Just be aware that in the event that you are playing around, and you've loaded this and loaded that, loaded this, if you do a remove module, which is allowed, and it removes the module from memory, it will not remove these. The assemblies are there to stay until the app domain unloads, which means you exit the window. Then they get flushed. Then you can open a new window, load to your heart's content, and you're off and running. So that's kind of one of those niceties, but if you don't understand it, you're going to get, a little caught unawares. All right, so let's go back to finding out what happens when you get things. So we're going to do a get-dba file. SQL instance is normal, bendesk, and we're going to database. We're going to database SQL help. Now, what I got back was a lot of information. Here's my bendesk. Here's my SQL help database. Here's my primary file group. ID is 1. My data file ID is 1. It's a rows, not a log. Here's my file name online. So this is really good information. But why would I do a get DBA file without wanting to do something with it? Now, I could get the information and like it, but here's how you tell. If I say get-dba help and I pipe it to get member, watch what it says. These are all note properties, not strings, not properties, but note properties, which means they were added. You can add anything to an object. So you have a automation PS custom object. If I had it in memory and I didn't do a get member and I said file equals, I could do file.getType. And it will come back that it's an object array. Oh yeah, I have 2. So I could do array syntax 0.getType. Find out that it actually is a PS custom object, not a database file. What I would see if it was a database file is db equals get DBA database, SQL instance. We're just going to say bendesk because we're going to use variables now. Database equals SQL help. If I did that, db.getType, I actually have an SMO database object. So I can actually manipulate it. And the file would look like this. db.filegroups files. There's my file, but if I did get type, I should see the data file object type, but I see PS custom object. And that PS custom object means I cannot interact with that file. Now, why you care? Here's where tomorrow is going to have some fun, because why we care is if I can get back a data file, every object, if I do a get member, whoops, without a pipe doesn't really help you. It has properties for size, and it's the size in kilobytes. Just so you know, it's not megabytes, it's kilobytes. Everything in SQL is kilobytes when you talk about size, except for the database.size. And that's only a read-only property anyway. You can't change the database size anyway. You have to change the file size, which then changes the database size. The database size in SMO is represented in megabytes. So if it's a gig, you'll see 1024, 1000 or something, and that'll be megabytes. In a database file, it's always KB. That's just how it is. You just have to live with it. So there's ways to do that. We'll show you how to shortcut it. But why I want a file is this. Size, it's 51200. So 512 meg technically. It's actually 512,000 KB. I can say size equals 67000. Now I'm adding 120 meg to this file. Not right now, because if I go back into my file here and I say my bendesk SQL help here and do properties, and I say files, you can still see it's still 500 meg. So it's not, I didn't really change it yet, but this is why you want an object. If I say db file dot alter, they all have it. If you scroll up here, all of them have this alter. Dude, I can alter this object. And now it just altered my database. So if I say right click properties, files. I'm now at 655. What the heck? How'd that happen? Well, it happened because I got an object back from DB file groups files. So when we see get-dba-db file, you have to know that it brings back data, not an object. So you have to go get the data file yourself and then modify it. So the database itself, when we said get-dba database, it did return a database. So I created this spreadsheet. I have not finished it, but this spreadsheet basically has the commands in DBA tools. And some of them, this is another thing we'll talk about in a second for DBA tools, because DBA tools has a lot of fun stuff they added that will help you. But notice here, connect-dba instance gives me an actual SMO object of a server. This get-dba database, or let's talk about alert, get-dba agent alert, is actually an alert. So I can actually do .drop or .alter or .disable. I can do all sorts of things because it's actually an object that will send a command to SQL. So alert category, job, I can drop a job, I can alter the job, I can do category, all this stuff. This get DBA HADR gets me a server. I haven't finished all of it on the gets. The listener probably does a listener, but I don't have a availability group. At least I didn't have one for before I came here to present. So I didn't have that. So I don't know, but I'm going to fill this out completely, and I'll probably actually blog it, because these are really important things to know when you start messing with SQL. In a normal world of PowerShell, you're going to get back lots of things. PS custom objects, you're going to get back WMI objects. They aren't alterable. But in SQL as a DBA, dude, it's huge. So available collation, you just get data rows back. It's just it's just a query. Client network protocol, oh, get DBA client protocol. You actually get a protocol back that you can alter. PS custom object, data row, custom object, credential. DBA credential actually sends back a credential object, so I can actually drop it, or I can actually do something with it in the SMO sense. Get DBA database, we showed, gets a database. Here's your assemblies. PS custom objects, is that okay? Well, it's okay. It just, and you may not be able to object, these are DBCC, so you may not be able to change it anyway. But this certificate, get DBA DB certificate. It's actually a certificate. You can actually drop it or alter it or whatever you can do with it anyway. So foreign keys, file groups, but not get DBA DB file. It gets a custom object. So this is why it's important under the covers in the advanced sense. When we start combining them tomorrow, you'll see why you really, really, really care what they send back. DB mail gives you back a SQL mail object that you can then change, alter the profile, change the server name, and then do a .alter, and it will make that happen. It will send the command to SQL to make that happen, whatever the script is, and you all of a sudden get some fun, okay? If we have time tomorrow, I'll show you one other function, and I'll make note of it so I don't forget. But there is, have you ever wondered what commands SMO sends to SQL? Like if I just did that size and I said .alter, what does it package up and send? Like, what is that? Some of it is just like if you say hit the script button and I'll right click properties, go to the files, change the size, and hit script. What do you think SQL SMO sends back? Just what the script would, right? The script's just scripting what it would do and what it would send. And so it would send that. There's a way to capture that actually in SMO, and I will show you that tomorrow. So I'm going to show capture SQL. So I'll make a note of that because that's really not today. It wasn't really planned, but I'll have a demo tomorrow just to show you how to do that so you can actually capture it. And it gives you the option to either capture and execute or just capture only. It's a mode, and you have to turn off the mode. If you turn it on, you have to turn it off, or else it will just capture and it will never execute the commands, and you'll think you're executing commands and you're really not. So just be careful. But this is a cool spreadsheet that references things that you get back. So if you ever wonder, and this subject to change, right? This is version specific for version 137, and I'll call that out. But it's nice to know what you're going to get back. It's kind of cool. All right, let's go back here. All right, let's pause for any questions. We're at 7:18. Any questions so far? That was a good tour of DBA tools. We're going to dive deep into SQL Server. So we are going to go a little past 7:30. I apologize, but Pat gave me the freedom, so I'm going to go ahead and use that freedom because I like to.
So I just wanted to go back to the PS Drive. I learned PowerShell through Drew in a class that he had through Brent Ozar, and he used PS Drive a lot. And so I was just kind of curious if you find yourself using it much, really, because I mean, again, PS Drive is actually doing a lot of these same objects like you're talking about. So I was just curious.
Yeah, Get PS Drive is really fun when you start messing with the provider, which we're going to show right now. And mostly because or new PS Drive only requires you to set a root. So that's the whole point of every drive that you can create with new PS Drive is the root. Where is the root? So in a SQL Server, if you're going to mess with a database, when you know where the SQL Server is and what database it is, why would you ever have all of the code and syntax in there forever instead of just doing a new PS Drive and then doing a remove PS Drive? So it does lend a lot of value when you start messing with things, with paths, with anything really. Now understand that PowerShell is the only beast that understands a PS Drive. So you can't map a PS Drive and then do a restore database from disk equals and use the PS Drive. It has no concept. It only understands UNCs and it understands URLs and it understands file names. That's pretty much it. So yes, they're really powerful inside PowerShell and there's reasons to use them. And some people would find reasons not to use them. But yes, PS Drives are awesome.
I wish we could get somebody to give us a good guide of what works within Azure and what works within AWS comparatively for the DBA tools commands, but also like the different PS Drive objects.
So the rule that you can follow for that, I mean, a guide would be a pretty short guide. The rule to follow is that anything that is SQL Server, so you can use these tools, these DBA tools and things against an Azure SQL DB, but not everything. Not everything works because Azure SQL DB is PaaS, you don't get the luxury of having them all work because technically there's no master database. And some of the DMVs are missing. Now, I will tell you that SMO, one of the first things SMO does is ascertain whether you're running a normal version of SQL or an Azure SQL DB. So it knows about Azure. It actually throws a flag and says, I'm Azure. And so anything you do that isn't allowed, it won't do. So it does have context. It does understand that. AWS, totally different deal because AWS, you're either dealing with EC2, which is a SQL server, it's a VM, or you're dealing with their PaaS. And their PaaS is obfuscated, and it does have a master. It's like a SQL instance. They are just managing it on the back end. You don't get access to the storage. You can't really expand the database. So there's some things you can't do, but it is an instance. It's a SQL instance, and all it will do is error out, throwing an exception if you try to do something in SMO against AWS that AWS doesn't allow. They will throw their own error messages saying, sorry, you can't do that. And you'll get it back in an exception in SMO. So you can use it against AWS and Azure and GCP. You can go in the Google Cloud and do the same thing. It is SQL. It is SQL. So it will understand commands. Anything they've obfuscated out of their version, you won't get. So that's the rule. So a guide, it'd be cool to see an explicit one, but they change so often that somebody would have to find value in creating a moving target. But the rules that I just illustrated are true. So if you follow those rules and tested your things to see if they worked before you put them in automation, you'd be super happy. So see this add SQL firewall? That is an Azure thing, not an on-premise thing. So sometimes you have to ascertain whether the command applies because there is no SQL firewall rule on premises. I mean, I've never seen a firewall rule in on-premises, but it definitely applies to Azure SQL. It doesn't apply to AWS SQL, and it doesn't apply to GCP SQL or any other flavor of SQL, but it does understand Azure in this case. So SQL firewall rule, pretty cool commandlet to do that. Not that you don't have it in the Azure, the AZ commands. You can do that as well because it understands the same. And same with the AZ CLI. It understands certain things too. So you have multiple ways in Azure because Microsoft wrote it. I mean, that's their platform. So you get some luxury that you don't get in AWS or GCP. So just know that that's kind of the rules. You test, and you see what works and what doesn't. Just be careful of running commands that you're not really familiar with. Be careful with running them against production before you know what they do, because it can scare you. Some of the commands are pretty in depth, and they do things that you don't think they do, just like getting back DBA file doesn't bring back an object, but you assume it would. And maybe a better name for the command would be get-dba file info, so that you knew it wasn't bringing you back an object. But just be careful. Some of these commands allude to things, and then you find out that the thing was an illusion. And you don't want that in prod. It actually did restore over your database. It did what? Okay, that's bad. So yeah, just be careful. So here's your commands. I will show you that these commands, if I measure object here, we did one last night. There were 590 in DBA tools. We'll do it again just to make sure. There's 600 in DBA tools and 113 in SQL Server. So definitely a vast difference in numbers. But think about how many developers Microsoft can devote to this module, and maybe how much more complex they are in C# than they are in PowerShell. And look how many more people in the community contribute to the DBA tools module. So we have a little bit more surface area on our side to do things. But nonetheless, they do some pretty cool things. Set error logs, set SQL credential. They do some sets that DBA tools doesn't. But all of a sudden you have the removes. You can remove things. You can remove role member. Now, I will tell you, this is one other caveat that you need to know. If it doesn't have SQL in front of it, it is an AS thing. So notice how they said restore AS database and remove role member. There's a get. There's an add role member as well, and that's analysis services, not SQL. So get add SQL login. You don't see an add login. That's a analysis services because that's not the principle. So anytime you see add role member or something like the remove role member, those are not SQL Server. They won't actually work against a SQL Server. They only work against analysis services. So you, again, get to know what your command is and what it does before you go writing automations for it, because you can really have some sad days when you do that. And they even have a read SQL X events, so it's kind of cool too. So these are nice commands. They have a function called SQL Server. So this is one thing I like to show because it's fun. People that do PS drives will know that you can't do HKLM : like you can D:. If I said D:, it will change me to D, mostly because the file system provider understands that syntax, but the registry provider, HKLM : says, I don't know what you're even freaking talking about. You're lost it, buddy. So you can't just change it like drives, but people get lulled into a false sense of security because I can type in SQL Server : and it does change my drive to SQL Server. And the reason is because there is a function called SQL Server : and what it does, I'll just take you a quick little loop back in the back covers. If you look at the C program files, Windows PowerShell, SQL Server, you will see that they cheated and didn't make it like a normal normal drive. They actually said, here's my PSM, no, that's the notebook, PSM1 here, And in their PSM1, they said, guess what I'm going to create? They're loading their DLLs here. They do it in the PSD one, or no, the PSM one, I guess it's loaded in the same place. But if you come down here, there is a little function. Why don't I see it? Oh, those little cheaters. They hid it. So they used to have it in here where it just defined a little function and exported the function. They must have thrown it in the DLL. That's really rude. But basically, if I wanted a HKLM thing, I could say function HKLM : set location HKLM : Now, if I want to go to HKLM, there I am. And that's all they did, was they created a function called SQL Server : set the location to SQL Server : and bam, now you can treat it like a drive in file systems. So it's a cheat, but it's cool. It's just a cheat. So that's how it works. But now we're going to go into SQL Server. So SQL Server : I'm going to do a dir, and you'll see that there's lots of things there. So this is like a file system, and that's the goal of every provider, is to represent your object or your environment as a path-based thing that's just like files. They just happen to have drive letters that aren't C through or A through Z. So each one of these, we're only going to really talk about the SQL registrations because we're going to use them. And then we're going to talk about SQL. Now there's SSIS, there's X events, there's database X events, there's all sorts of things that is really cool, but you can explore them on your own because sometimes you have to teach people how to fish. I'm going to go into SQL and see that it has my machine name. Now, if I were to go further, this machine name, there is one thing on the local machine that is called localhost. And I do a dir here and localhost. Wow, that is okay. So that's a different thing. If I do a dir, localhost is there, but if I say localhost, it won't let me do that. So that may be a bug actually. Bendesk. If I do a dir, here's my instances. So I have Bendesk, instance 1, instance 2, Veeam. That's my name, and yeah, there is a bug. They omitted the computer name, which sometimes happens in coding. My versions are here, 14, 14, 13, and it tells me if they're clustered, and it says I'm connected as. Whenever it's Windows, it's just your Windows login. Here's the is Azure flag. Look at that. So it knows if you're in Azure. So it's not dumb. It's pretty smart. And it will tell you if it's Azure. So now I'm going to go into my instance 1. And dir. Now, once I get to this instance 1, I am now inside SQL Server, and if I do a dir, it has to authenticate me. There's no choice because you can't see anything in a database server without authenticating. You're in metadata at this point. If you're in Bendesk, you're only to the machine level, which you have a right to be in, and you don't have to authenticate yet. If I do a dir, now I lied a little. You have to authenticate if you're not using the local machine name. The local machine name you're on, it will just read the registry. So technically, you have to have registry permissions to read it, but most everybody has registry permissions for these to read. You just can't change them. As soon as you go to a remote server, you do have to have access to that server to read the registry to tell you the instances, because that's where it gets them. The instances are actually in the registry, so it will tell you based on what the registry says. But as soon as I go into the instance, it has to authenticate me. See, notice CD instance, it says I can't find instance. And I forgot I shouldn't have done that because it takes 30 seconds to kill. We'll go back to code here for a second and do something else. So when we get done with this, when we get into this provider, we'll show you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to show you a couple of examples of things that you can do, and we're going to be using this provider. The commands, I'm not going to show you commands because commands are commands. It's pretty simple. Commands will do command stuff. And let's go back into our code here. So if I do cd instance 1, and I do a dir, now I've authenticated. I'm going to go into logins, just go into logins and do a dir. Now I have my names here, and I have my SQL logins, and you'll notice they're just pound. Notice what you don't see. What don't you see? I don't see SA. What the crap? I mean, why is that the case? There, and we showed you dir variable. So variable, there is a variable called SQL Server stuff. SQL Server includes system objects equals false. So it will not include. Now, if you want to be a Jedi, you can pretend you're a Jedi and use the Force, and it will automatically give you the system stuff. So if I went back here and did databases, I wouldn't see system unless I use the Force. Or if I took this variable and said $ variable equals true. Now, if I did a dir without Force, I would see them. Master model MSDB. I can turn it off just that fast and say no, do another dir, and they're gone. So you do have the option in the context. It believes that you want user context first, so it just omits them, and you're happy. So let's go into databases, and we're going to go into Ben. No, we're going to go. Oh, I'm on instance 1, so let's go into Ben. If I do a dir, I get all these things, triggers. You know, you see this kind of thing inside the Object Explorer. Now, this is all in one because it doesn't want to categorize. These are at the database level, and it's everything. So views, they don't go into different places. So the storage, you'd have to go into storage to find out partition functions and schemes. There's schemas. So I'd have to go into there for insecurity to get to schemas, but there's no security here. It's just schemas. So everything's at the level of this guy. We're going to go into the tables. There's no tables. If I said, go into Ben, and I created a table. Create this table, go back in here. It goes back and gets them. Now, I'm going to show you a contrasting thing in SMO because you're going to need to know this for your automations. It will kill you. If I say connect or server, let's just do server. We did it, but let's just do a server equals connect dash DBA instance with SQL instance of Ben desk. No, of instance 1, because that's where we are. I have a server and I do databases. Ben.tables. I see DBO test. Now watch this. I go and create test 2. Created. I go into my window here and I say server.databases Ben tables, and it says, what are you talking about? There's test. Where's test 2? But if I do a dir, I have test 2. So there's one thing the provider does that the other one doesn't do, is it makes a connection and looks to see if anything's different. Anything that's cached, it will use in the cache, but it will actually go back and refresh its content. Now I can take this and say .refresh. Every object in SMO has refresh. So now if I said tables, now I see both. Okay. So there is an option to see it in SMO, but this is the key. Whenever you start scripting and automating in SMO in your code, and you get a server object and something happens afterwards, say the size changes and you want to expand the size and it already auto grew bigger than your size, you'll get an error because you're trying to alter the file to be smaller than what it is now because it auto grew. So there's a refresh on every object. So you refresh and then add the stuff you want to do so that you never get that error. But in this case, I wouldn't have seen test if I was operating against it unless I did a refresh before I iterated through the tables. So those are things you need to know between the provider and through this. Now, here's the other thing I could do. I'm in tables right here. So I could say tables equals get child item or dir. And now my tables are these tables. It is actually an SMO object, table 0 dot get type is a table. I mean, the provider only gives you back objects. It never gives you back data. So now I know if I mess with the provider, then I get some advantage. Now, here's the other key to the provider. It is just a path, right? And paths can be in strings. So I could say, and I could say this. My server name is Bendesk. My instance is instance1. And these can come from anywhere. These can come from passed in parameters. It can come in anything. db equals ben. And I can actually come in here and say dir, and in double quotes, because that's how we replace, I can say server instance and database. And I can do this command and it will actually, it'll actually replace. Whoops, it's going to try to connect to something that doesn't exist. Dang it, I hate when I do that. I didn't load these into memory. So we'll give it a second for it to calm down. Come on, calm down. Cue the Jeopardy music. It's all good. I mean, I was just kidding. Don't cue the Jeopardy music. We're good. There we go. So now I'll load these first, and that way we have our variables. And now I can run this guy, and all of a sudden I get my tables with parameters. So now I can dynamically, this is like dynamic PowerShell, right? So I can take the server. Now the only caveat here is that you can't, in a path, you can't have a blank. So what if it was a default instance? What if I wanted to go after Bendesk? And that's it. I would have to put the instance. Heaven forbid you name one of your instances default. I don't know why you would, but if you do, you'll never see the default instance because default will be actually the instance name default. So just beware, that is one of the caveats. It had to come up with a word, and default seemed like the logical step because maybe you would never, ever, ever, ever name your instance default, because why would you? But that's the caveat you need to understand when you're coding against this provider. One more example. So these test tables, we love them to death. But if I were to go after my tables, and I said table, let's do this. Table equals, no, right there. So I say tables equals server.databases.ben.tables. And oh, come on. Oh, did I rename my server? Oh, that's funny. I did. Server equals connect to a instance. Oh, I'm just going to do my pound connect. There we go. Instance 1. All right. So now I have my server back with my little pound trick. And now I'm going to say tables equals server.databases and .tables. And I should have 2 of them. Tables. My tables should be 2. But watch what happens if I want to delete them, right? So say I want to delete these tables. Well, each object has drop, right? So I'm just going tables pipe to for each. And I'm going to $_drop. Do it, right? Whoa, what happened? Now I'm getting an error. Why can't I just do that? There's a trick in SMO that says that you cannot modify the collection. Here's the collection is modified. You can't do that. But here's what you don't know. If I do $tables, there's only one left. It actually dropped the first one. But when it got done dropping it, SMO wanted to remove it from the array of tables, and it threw that error. So it errored actually on the second, before it got to the second drop. So you get 1 drop. So we're going to go back and recreate it. We'll create the first one again. And then we'll refresh this guy. Oh yeah, right. I forgot. Yeah. We're going to just do that because we have to refresh it first and then we go back and get it. Now we have tables with 2, okay? So now, if I were in the provider, which I am, and I do dir, notice I have two of those tables. What you can do in a file system is not use the drop. You don't have to use the drop. So this is where we use drop with a for each. In a file system, I can remove files just by doing dir remove item. And there's no restriction that I'm modifying a collection. I just do dir remove item and hello, it's a file system. So remove item even works. That's not even a SQL command. I didn't see drop in there, but it actually, if I do a dir, they're gone. If I do my tables, refresh, and look at them, nothing's there. They're gone. So all of a sudden in the provider, you want to drop all the tables? Go into tables and do dir and remove item, and they are gone. You don't have to go and build your command to say drop tables or select drop table if exists, blah, blah, blah. You just get in the provider and do dir, pipe, remove item, and they're gone. No restrictions. Now that's dangerous, but dude, if you want it, you can do it. The only other thing I'll show you in the provider here, as it pertains to syntax, is how to get in there. So we're going to create those tables back. And if I do dir again, they're there. Okay. Notice the schema name's DBO and the name of the table is test. So you would think that you could say CD DBO. Comes back and says, dude, I'm not sure what you're smoking, but that's not right. You can't do that. You just get a ton of yucky. The number of keys don't match, and it's yucky, because tables are a special beast. In order to get into a table, it has two parts. DBO.test. And now I'm in DBO.test. What happens if you have a space in the name of your table, which you should be flogged for? But that happens a lot in data warehouses, and people do that. But you should still be taken behind the woodshed and given a good flogging, because you just shouldn't put spaces in things or funny characters like dashes and things like that. But you certainly could, in this case, get into it, but you'd have to do CD DBO dot and quote test. And then you could put a space in the table name and all that stuff. So that would look like something like this, where you'd create a table and you'd say bracket to second or space second and create the table, and it would let you. You'd come down in here, whoops, not in there, in here, and you'd say dir, and I'd see test space second, but I couldn't say DBO.test to space second. It would go, I don't know. I really don't know what that argument is, because PowerShell knows what spaces mean. It means a break in the argument. So I could do then quote and quote. And I'd get into my test second table. I do a dir, and now I can see checks and columns and foreign keys and indexes, and I can do a dir or CD columns and do a dir, and I get my ID. Now notice I only see ID. This is one of those format types thing. SQL Server team said whenever you see a column, only show them the ID, nothing else. But I could say dir and then do full format list, and I'd get my ID with all the stuff. So if I went like this, I'd see all the stuff for that column. So my name is ID, my child name is ID, my PS drive is PS drive SQL Server, and all of my stuff. Now look at what you don't see. Where's the data type? Int. But did you know there's more to that data type than this? If I said dir, and we're just going to do get item, get dash item ID, and pipe it to, well, let's just do this. Hopefully you knew you could do this. If you didn't, then you should learn, but I can say data type. That's what's in a data type. Not just int, but the data type, the schema. If a data type has a schema, I've never seen that. So maybe it's possible. Oh yeah, it's schema if the data type is a table value type or a user defined type. You'll get a schema in there. Maximum length is 4, precision's 10, scale 0. All of this stuff is all part of the data type. It's not just int. But in this case, it says int. So you do have some objects in here that you can muck with too. The last thing I'm going to show you for this demo, I knew there was way more content than I could show in an hour and a half, but it will still be important because I'm going to show you DBA check later. It takes about 4 minutes to run. I will show you where I already ran it just to show you what it outputs and why you care. And then I'll show you the import Excel module really quick to just show you what you can do. But the reality for what was I just talking about? That's just sad. I went totally off kilter and I can't remember what I was talking about. Showing you right now. Oh, yes, now I remember. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is this little guy called a URN. Hopefully you all know what a URN is. It's not something that is talked about a ton, but URNs are great. And basically it's this, server.databases ben.urn. This URN is an object, so you have to pull out the value of it. So you would do .value. But this URN guy has a syntax, and it is a very standard syntax, and it looks kind of funny. But this URN right here is just a string. So I paste this in, it's just a string. That's all it is. But what this does for you is if you have a server object, you can get this object, this database name Ben, into an object by saying db equals, and then you can say server dot get SMO object. And I'll validate that here, server pipe to get member. And I think that there is, I'm pretty sure because that's I've used it before, get SMO object, and it says it takes, oh, it doesn't say right here, it takes a URN. So if I pass this in and I have double quotes, notice how it uses single quotes. So you can use double quotes here. So I do double quotes here and I get SMO object and I execute that. Watch what happens. My db.getType is an actual database. And that database is Ben. And it's a full-blown SMO object by knowing that URN. So if I might store these URNs in a table, and they're rather than having to navigate down server.databases. Whatever, this guy knows what the name of the instance is and knows what the database is. So all of and every object has a URN. So your tables, your indexes, your columns, all of that is in a URN. So super powerful principle. We won't really be using them tomorrow, but I wanted to introduce you to them because most people don't talk about them, but they are really in the SMO world. They are beautiful. They're a great thing to be messing with. They're a great thing. You can actually do the same thing here as you did with the path here, because this is simply a string. That's all it is. And it's in a double quoted string, which means I can do $bendesk. I can do instance 1 here because I don't have a variable with just instance 1. And then I can do database. And it will actually replace those and then get the SMO object. So now I can actually parameterize these with the right syntax, and you get your favorite syntaxes for the one that says table, the one that says column, and you put these in with variables. You can get your SMO object right there without having to navigate this thing or the tables thing. I mean, you don't have to navigate the tables guy to get down to the database table stuff. You just get the table. I guess there is not any in there right now. But the URNs are super, super cool. And I forgot to show you one last thing with the provider. a lot of times I get asked, can you go see, I manage SaaS databases, and will you go see if that database, we got an error this morning, can you go see if that table exists in the database? Because this is a file system, there's my tables. I can actually say test path server :SQL Bandesk instance 1 databases, and again, these can be iterated over with the names tables DBO.test. It comes back true. If I want to know if test 3 existed, it comes back false. So all of a sudden, I can have my list of databases, my list of servers in this syntax. And remember, it's default. If you're going to do the provider with a default instance, you just have default in there. And I can iterate through all of these instances and databases and tell you if that table existed by name. So all of a sudden, I have a really, really good mechanism to iterate over these databases and tell you whether or not they exist. I can't even imagine the craziness that you can do with these things, but it's super, super cool on the provider side. There's other things I'll show you tomorrow when we do the things. Somebody will ask you to script out a database. I'm going to show you exactly how to script out an entire database using the provider. It's pretty slick. I won't make it a big database, so it won't take long to do, so we don't have to do that. But and then I'll make sure that this is all part of the materials that I post up on GitHub or GitHub, and I'll keep it fluid because I haven't gone into every one of these commands to see what they bring back, but I will to make sure we have a full reconciliation. Like I said, it will be a living document because this only has 590 commands, and there's 600 we just saw. So they've added some in the 137. This was done in the version before 137 on this machine, so it is missing some, and we'll just filter them in there so that we can have them. So the last things we're going to show are basically, I will show you tomorrow the Posh RS job. We'll show you practical use instead of just introducing you because there's not much in the module. There's just a few commands, and without showing you how to use it in doing things, you won't really, I mean, unless you've used it, you won't really kind of grasp it until you see it in action because it's kind of hard to talk about parallelism. It doesn't really work well. Here's the DBA check. So I invoked DBA check or DBC check, and the SQL instance was Bandesk, and I just said run all checks. And the all checks took 488 seconds on this instance, and 779 checks passed. 218 were failed, and 51 were skipped. Mostly because I don't have an availability group. I don't have some things that it checks. And so it will skip them. It won't error them because if they don't exist, they can't be checked. So they have to be skipped. So there's certain things that it skips because you don't have it. And so that's good. So we'll show you the commands in here, and we'll show you how you consume this. And I hope I have Power BI installed on this thing. I'm pretty sure I do. Git command module DBC check. Okay. Oh, DBA. Yeah, sorry. I was already using their prefix. Their prefix is DBC, as you noticed, DBC, because they don't want to be DBA or SQL, so they're DBC checks. But there is a update DBC Power BI data source. Oh, that's if I'm sorry. It already puts it in there. That's if I have an object to put there, but I can say start-DBC Power BI. And like I said, I hope Power BI is running. I hope I have it. I do. So let me bring it into the window once it fires up. And we'll see what it does. It's pretty cool. You can create your own custom checks, and you can omit some checks depending on how you do it. But I will got it. I will bring the window in here because it just popped up on the other window, which did not help anybody. All right. So notice it came in here and says, here's how many tests, here's the success, here's your failed, and 93.2 success. And I probably already have run this once. So it probably just it probably just did the thing. So 6.8% failed and 93.2 success. If I click on the failed, there is a recovery model. That's interesting. But here's your results for that, 6.8 fail. DAC is set to tune. Oh, this is Rob XPS. That's why I wanted to run my, where's my update? Come on, don't leave me hanging. They don't have that. Oh, come on. That's just a default. That's just a default data set he has in there. There's Rob XPS. Maybe there's, yeah, that's just environments. That's all his. I want this update. Okay, we're going to go to the web because we're advanced people. And we're going to go to the home of DBA checks. Here we go. DBC check commands. Come on, bring it on. And then we are going to find out how we make that work. We don't have to worry about that. Get DBC config. Start Power BI. You will need to refresh the Power BI dashboard every time to see the new results. Oh, so maybe I do it in Power BI. You can tell how I'm awesome in my Power BI. Refresh. It's going to grab the data model that I just produced, and it didn't like me. So there should have been a folder in here. See Windows temp. And it should have wanted refresh. DBA checks. Okay, so let's go back into here. See Windows temp isn't even in there. See Windows temp. DBA checks. Yeah, so it's not even there. So that's really weird that it makes me create that thing, but we will do that. Managing directory temp. But it can, it already exists. See, this is how you fumble around and make your world crazy. Yeah, there isn't a DBA checks. That's probably why it wasn't able to create it when it started the tests. So it wants DBA checks. Yep. So that's why. It should have already existed because it's supposed to be smart. But anyway, this is why we play and test. I did not get a chance to test this other than running the checks, which did succeed, or at least it said it succeeded and did that. But why we don't see any JSON is because the DBA checks folder doesn't exist. And we will have to, by tomorrow, I will update this and I'll show you the dashboard. But basically it does this. And for your environment, it shows you how many tests, how many failed, how many passed, and then it will show you your details here based on your environment that you choose. We'll only have production, but this is one of the default sets so that you at least have something to view. And then when you refresh the data, you actually get the new data and you get this out of here. So he puts it all in JSON and stuffs it in there. So DBA checks is pretty cool. It actually gives you some pretty fun things. And the last thing is we're going to use Export Excel. Tomorrow we'll see a little more advanced usage of Export Excel because they do have a lot of formatting things. And so you can turn cells different colors. But at this point, I'm just going to export out to Excel databases in bin so we can open it, and then worksheet name, databases. I can actually say show. Oh, it's not going to let me, is it? Cell show. Show. So I'm going to run. I'm going to get rid of this command here. I'm going to run this here, and it's going to get my SQL instance, get my database, exclude the system. So I'm only going to see what I want to see. And then it's going to export that result set and put it in Excel. I like to say format table because I like to see what it does. And then I usually go format auto column width. And you'll notice that it has backup status. And my databases, say I told it to name the worksheet databases instead of sheet 1, and it named my sheet databases. It has all this information that comes from the get-DBA database, my compatibility level, my last full backup, my last diff backup, my last log, the parent, all the way over to all the stuff, version 140 compatibility level. Here's my collation. And my settings for is backup DB operator, blah, 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 is full text enabled. There's my log reuse wait status. So this looks kind of familiar, like select star from sys databases. So it's kind of fun. But this is all going into a spreadsheet. And I could have added formatting, which we'll do tomorrow when we combine them all. We're going to basically run some things together. And oh, look at that. It gave me my URN. I didn't ask for that. The URN is not in sys databases, but it gave me my URN. So now the get-DBA databases does include the URN, and I can have some fun. So it's kind of cool. This is all the SMO properties, by the way. That's why it's not just sys databases. It's actually object-based. But anyway, really cool option to stuff it out to Excel. And you can add a tab, tab name of blah, and it will actually add the tab. So I believe that actually it will let me add it here. So if I go in here and do get-DBA database here and do instance 1, it should add it. We're going to test it on the fly because I haven't tested it, but I'm going to worksheet name databases 2. And I don't believe there is I don't think there's there isn't an append, but I'm not sure what that really means. So we're going to just run this command here so you can see it live and see if it actually, now you can't be in it. I'm not in it, so it's okay. I'm not in it, but let's see what happens. Databases stayed the same in my table. Databases 2 is less databases, but it didn't do table, but it kept my first one. So it exports it to a new sheet. So I could actually have multiple things and export all my databases for every one of my instances in a new sheet in one Excel spreadsheet. Now go do that with T-SQL. I mean, come on, let's not do that with Management Studio. You're going to have to try really hard to get that to happen, right? So super cool ideas and super cool things that you can do. But you've only learned about them right now, and we're going to actually do some things tomorrow. So we're going to have a little fun tomorrow. So with that, I will leave you to your night. And thank you for coming over tonight and having a great chat with me.
Well, you did a great job, Ben, and you actually finished almost 25 minutes early.
It's all good.
I think I might have stepped on somebody. Was someone trying to speak there?
It was just me, Juan from Des Moines, just saying thank you, Ben.
You are welcome, Juan. Glad to be here.
Yeah, this is Sheila from Quad Cities, and thank you, and see you tomorrow night. Looking forward to it.
Yep, we'll be here with bells on with tomorrow night and having a little more fun than tonight. But hopefully tonight was a good idea of what you can do. The DBA checks, I was hoping I could show you the Power BI, but I'll make sure you see that tomorrow because it's really cool what you can do and creating your own checks. And I'm going to attempt to have one for you as part of our demo to show you how you can add that to your list, because invoke DBC check lets you specify a check. I said all checks, but you can actually specify one check or your own check and just do that one as part of your automated script. So you can check your compatibility level and that's it. So there's lots of things that it's hard to demo. It's easy to demo, but there's so much to demo that I'd rather show you practical use tomorrow to demo it fully. So hopefully that doesn't make anybody upset, but it'll be a fun time tomorrow with putting all the pieces together and then seeing how you can leverage all of these pieces in a nice automation that does something meaningful, and you can leverage everything in PowerShell is a script, and as long as you have the tools installed, like the DBA tools and SQL Server and checks, you're gonna walk away with some super darn good fun. So
sounds good. You must be muted, Pat.
As a matter of fact, I was saying thanks a bunch, Ben. I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will continue to chat as long as people wish, but I think we reached the point where recording doesn't serve a purpose anymore.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yep.